Thank you for joining, all of you who are still trying to join. This is a webinar with Sowmya and Shirin on 10th anniversary of SAGER. We are going to be very informal, just like a birthday party when people come in and we start talking about all of our memories about the birthday person. So this is the whole spirit. Hi, Asif. Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. Thanks for joining this birthday celebration. I'm going to start. We are recording the first half of this webinar because I think many people want to join, but maybe they are not able because of the time zone differences or other duties. The second half is all up to you because it's going to be an open mic Q&A. And if you don't want to record it, even one vote suffice. You just put it on the chat and we stop recording. My name is Bahar Mehmani. I am an employee of Elsevier, so to state my conflicts of interest potentially. And also, I am grateful for being president of EASE. And today with me, we have Sowmya and Shirin, and I let them introduce themselves. We are here to celebrate SAGER's 10th anniversary. We start with Sowmya. She graciously agreed to join this call early morning her time. I don't know whether she had already had her coffee or it's still brewing. Thank you, Sowmya, for joining. Please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thanks, Bahar. My name is Sowmya Swaminathan. I am director of our Global Inclusion Research Publishing program at Springer Nature. And before leading our effort on global inclusion in research publishing, I was head of editorial policy for the Nature portfolio journals. And it was really in that context that I first got engaged with sex and gender as a reporting standard. And I just want to say it's great to join you all, and huge congratulations to SAGER and to all of you, Shirin, EASE, on getting us to this really important milestone in the history of SAGER.
Thank you so much. Shirin, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, and it's great to be in the company of you, all of you, and Bahar and Mary and Sowmya as well. So my name is Shirin Heidari. I am the director of GENDRO, a non-for-profit association that promotes gender responsive, sensitive, and inclusive research practices. I'm also a researcher at the Geneva Graduate Institute, and here today I am in my capacity as the lead author of the SAGER guidelines and the former founding chair of the Gender Policy Committee during my time of the EASE Council. So it is lovely to gather together with all of you and celebrate and reflect on the journey that took us here in these 10 years, and also join forces in advancing the agenda forward collectively.
Thank you. Well, I would want to start the conversation by asking Shirin, like about the birthday, what was the motivation? What was the call and drive behind creating SAGER guideline? Tell us a little bit more about what brought SAGER into world, and then we can talk about what happened since then.
Thank you, Bahar. And I always reflect on that journey and, what led to, one thing led to the other that brought us here. And I always kind of see that in addition to obviously the wider recognition of SAGER and the impact it has, but also as an example of how a seed and of idea can really grow through collaboration and cooperation. Because I think really the SAGER tale is a tale of collective effort. And how it came about is that at the time, and again, the SAGER guidelines were published in 2016, but it took many, many years before that in, again, planting the seed and watering it and growing it and nurturing it. So almost 10 years before that, in 2011, when I was the editor of the Journal of the International AIDS Society, as an editor, I was quite kind of surprised of the lack of sex and gender reporting being so absent in the submitted manuscript. And as an editor, I took the liberty to introduce a gender policy at our journal. And then I thought, if I can do that, why can't other editors do that as well? And it was around the time I was actually invited and appointed as a member of the Council of EASE. And I remember very clearly I think it was the Congress in Tallinn, when I proposed to the council to establish a gender policy committee under the EASE umbrella. And they kind of said, yes, please go ahead. And I was walking on the coffee break, literally. I was walking in the coffee break, and I didn't know many people at that time. And then I started talking with people, and I was wondering, would you like to join the gender policy committee? So it was literally how we established the initial members of the Gender Policy Committee. And again, I was very surprised that people were very interested and committed to the topic at a time when nobody in the editorial publishing field were really talking about that.
Shirin, when was that?
2011, I introduced the Gender Policy Committee in the Journal of the International AIDS Society. Mm-hmm. And 2012, I think, was the Congress in Tallinn. Yes, Mary is confirming that. We're kind of gathered together. So again, it took us 8 years. Yes, almost. We are more. 4 years, 6, for us to kind of gather the Gender Policy Committee. Again, recruiting additional members with a very gender balanced. I also had the pleasure to co-chair the Gender Policy Committee with Tom Babur, which I don't know if he's with us today. And again, initially thinking about developing a common standard, we did a lot of literature review, we did a survey, and eventually, after a number of meetings, most of them self-funded, developed the SAGER guidelines, and we can talk more about the details in a minute.
Thank you. Sowmya, you're also very much you said you started as like focusing, overseeing on the quality of performance of the research and the trustworthiness of the research published by Nature portfolio. How did you get to know SAGER guidelines? When was the first time you also had this moment of like, whoa, how come we don't have that kind of a systematic reporting of SAGER, or in general, say sex and gender reporting in our submissions?
Yeah, so our kind of evolution on this topic has been quite holistic and very much aligned with our general approach to transparency in methods reporting and everything that we can do as editors and publishers to improve reproducibility, translatability of research, and effectively, ensure that the research we're publishing can ultimately create benefits across the board. And actually, pre-SAGER, our first introduction, and I just want to also just say that, our approach has also gone hand in hand with the ecosystem at large, right? And has kind of also paralleled what's happened in the funder space, as funders also get increasingly focused on sex and gender as a reporting standard. So our first approach in this direction actually happened in 2013. When we introduced sex as a biological variable, and that was very much aligned with the NIH's introduction of sex as a biological variable initiative. And so at that point in 2013, we were actually unrolling a fairly ambitious and aspirational reproducibility initiative where we were introducing a reporting checklist as an instrument for reporting on many different aspects of research design and then research reporting. And that was a requirement for every submission that went through peer review. And ultimately, we actually now publish that checklist alongside the published paper. And the reviewers have access to it through the peer review process and so on. So the first thing we did was actually build in sex as a biological variable, reporting on sex into that checklist. And a few years after the introduction of that checklist, we, through third-party analysis, discover that actually that is a really useful instrument for behavior change and for transparent reporting. We found that you could get reporting on, say, 52% of studies post-intervention versus 36% of non-NPG studies that didn't have that checklist. So then when SAGER came along, it was published, I think it was published actually in a BMC journal, right? And the BMC journals had included it into their guidelines. And at that point, we were all part of a happy family as Springer Nature. In 2019, it was before 2019, it was a couple of years even before that, we included SAGER in a relatively more passive way, recommending it across editorial guidelines across all our imprints. And then, in 2021, 22, we took a slightly more active step, which I can tell you about down the road. But so that was really the evolution, very much working hand in hand with the ecosystem to introduce it as a reporting standard.
Thank you. Shirin, tell us a little bit about the journey of SAGER to basically go and discover the world and be implemented across different sectors, journals and funders, and maybe research ethics committees. So since the launch of it, what has happened?
And again, it's great to see journals have really taken this up, and Nature has been really, again, alongside some of the key medical journals, really key in driving this journey forward. And I remember very clearly, it was in the Gender Summit. And again, I'm mentioning that because there's a lot of different partners and actors that have really played a very important role in highlighting this issue. I think Gender Summit of 2011 or 2012, when it was the first panel of the kind that I remember, when it was me, it was, I think, at that time, Magdalena Skipper from Nature. I don't remember if she was still the editor-in-chief at that time. And then we had somebody from the Lancet that had that conversation in the first time, I remember, around like, what is the role of publishers and editors in terms of gender responsive. So I think all of those steps kind of paved the way for us, that once the SAGER guidelines were published, really trying to reach out to those partners, and there were, again, all of them were champions in their own rights, to push it forward through their own journals, through their own publishers, through their own institution to get it adopted. And again, I think we still have a long way. We can discuss about the next steps as well. And I think that collective ownership, again, we have a lot of our regional partners from EASE who translated the SAGER guidelines in multiple different languages. And I think those obviously help greater awareness, greater uptake. And of course, once the leading journals do that and the leading publishers do that, of course, it's easier then for others to follow suit. And we were particularly pleased to also see that now, beyond the publisher and journals, also research institutions, international organizations are taking this up as part of their publication policies, as part of their research or institutional policies, such as the World Health Organization, the Fine Diagnostic, I think, in Geneva, the Swiss Tropical and Public Health Institute, and a number of other institutions who are now exploring that to incorporate that. And at GENDRO, we are also expanding the SAGER guidelines to the research ethics committees by establishing an international working group and developing the SAGER ethics committee, is really trying to tailor the recommendations specifically towards both submission and evaluation of the research protocols.
Thank you. Sowmya, tell us a little bit more about the challenges of implementing such checklists within journals. You initially mentioned that it happens in an ecosystem. It cannot be just one journal or one group of journals. What are the challenges? Why don't we see all journals like having this on their submission system already.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of journals have adopted SAGER as a reporting standard in the sense that they have incorporated it into their guidelines, right? And you know, certainly we did that across BMC, Springer, and the Nature journal. So in a significant but passive way, they are upholding it as a standard. They are making it visible to their community of authors, reviewers. But I think what we found on the Nature journal side, especially, and I just also want to stress that, journals, have massively different models. Researchers as authors and reviewers also have somewhat different thresholds for what they're willing to subject themselves to for different journals. So I think we also have to take into account those sorts of considerations. Much as you may want to take a baseline approach across all journals, and I do believe that's actually very important for transparency and reproducibility. In reality, when it comes to actually implementing that, there can be all kinds of challenges, right? So I think what we learned through our experience of the reporting checklist on the Nature Journal side is this is an incredibly powerful tool for behavior change. We also had evidence from that instrument that actually researchers found it useful enough that they continued to use the checklist even after the cycle of submission and peer review and publication was complete. So it continued to inform their future work. And what that checklist did was really kind of integrate it into the editorial and peer review workflow for authors, reviewers, editors. So as a next step in 2021-22, what we did was break down the SAGER guidelines into its component parts because, it's a fairly complex set of guidance, right? And we built that as a module into our checklist. So we kind of simplified it for authors into its component parts and then integrated it into the editorial and peer review workflow. And I think that probably has made a material difference. I mean, I know anecdotally it has. The other thing we've also done is actually take a slightly more hands-on approach for a subset of journals where this is really important, where we're nudging the authors in decision letters, we're nudging the reviewers in decision letters, and that has had a really good impact. It's kind of become business as usual. It's relatively low friction. It is very much an effort to raise awareness and create transparency, rather than like a stick. So, to change behavior. So, and I think that, 10 years on, there is considerable awareness, right? And the fact that several funders with large footprints are on board, have embraced SAGER, the majority of journals, even if they don't sort of integrate it into submission systems, do integrate it into their policy landscape, has all had very important impact in terms of increasing awareness, and reinforcing the fact that this is not a nice to have, it's really a must to have, especially when you're talking about research findings and the translatability of research findings. So I hope that answers your question, Bahar.
Thank you.
Sort of,
yes.
yeah.
And I already have a follow-up question. I'll come back to you on that. Shirin, you wanted to also talk about plans for future. So here we are 10 years on after you published the SAGER guidelines. What's the plan? Where are the focus areas? Journals seems to be very much adopting it. Funders are getting on board. Institutions, as you said, are becoming aware of the power of SAGER guidelines. So tell us about your vision on the 20th anniversary of SAGER.
Thank you so much. And I have to say, again, having been an editor, I totally recognize the challenges and the time it takes for these reporting guidelines to find their place in the editorial system, to be implemented, for authors to really follow them through. And I think then the next 10 years, if I may, kind of my hope and aspiration is, first of all, a greater implementation by authors and support through editors and editorial systems by publishers. And again, we are exploring a collaboration with Elsevier and Imperial College to support the greater implementation of the SAGER guidelines in the publishing systems. And that will be absolutely critical in terms of really making an impact. Again, we are delighted that the SAGER guidelines is 1.4 million times accessed and uniquely downloaded, and the campaign targeted to reach it to 2 million. But our key target is trying to make sure that, first of all, that all journals and publishers adopt and incorporate the SAGER guidelines, and during the next 10 years, making sure that they are more systematically implemented. The second kind of a vision that I would like to say that we have is a greater harmonization of the SAGER guidelines and its recommendations across the entire research ecosystem. And again, we have talked a lot about that of course editors and publishers play an important role, but funders, research ethics committees, regulatory agencies, all the other stakeholders, normative agencies do play an important role. So for us to try to continue advocating, first of all, for implementation of the guidelines, also by other stakeholders within their own capacities and institution, and extension and expansion of the SAGER guidelines to those other gatekeeping functions. Again, we are starting with the SAGER ethics work because we think ethics committees play a very key roles. But of course, at the same time, we also know that funders have taken similar kind of recommendations up. So really trying to harmonize these across the research ecosystem. So I'm welcoming everyone to really help us pushing forwards on those different goals and targets.
Thank you. Sowmya, my question to you is, what would be your recommendation to journals who are trying to engage further with the authors and reviewers and encourage them to adopt them? What will be an easier threshold for the community around the journal to not only adopt, but also promote, and as you said, start to use it for planning their future research?
Yeah, I think the thing that can really make a difference is integrating it into the process, right? So that everybody who's engaging with peer review is encountering it through the course of the evolution of the manuscript. Now, that said, I do, I think that journals and publishers have a very important role to play in upholding standards, in being part of that virtuous cycle, of reinforcing standards. That said, we come right at the end, right? We are at the end of the process. And so I think this work that Shirin is doing upstream is really, really important. And I'm thrilled to hear about it. I'm thrilled to hear that there's effort to engage with institutional research boards, IRBs, ethics committees, because I think that will really be a game changer. Once you start integrating this thinking in a holistic way at the level of institutions, then I think that's actually half the battle won. And then I think that is going to make it much more straightforward for journals to then be able to reinforce those expectations and requirements. So I think, of course, journals can and do already uphold the standard. I think they can do more in terms of integrating it into workflows. I do think that's challenging for a lot of journals. But I think once we get that upstream engagement happening, I think it's just going to, make it more seamless for journals to also be able to reinforce.
And just to add, Sowmya, it is funny because at the time when I was developing the SAGER guidelines and we were having all these conversations, editors were definitely saying that we are coming so late in the system. We are really, and I think that's obviously a valid point. And there is also the other side that we really should incorporate reporting practices that are more comprehensive. But now that I'm working with the ethics committees, they say exactly the same thing, and it's so funny. They say, oh, we are so late because by the time people submit their protocols, they have already got funded and their protocol has written, so we cannot do anything. And I say, oh my God, this resonates. It's a similarity. So everybody is like pushing it upstream. But I think it's just important for everybody to recognize all actors could play a little role. And I think collectively we can shift the needle.
Yeah. And Shirin, I'm sure you know this, but there was a fairly detailed analysis carried out a few years ago on how the funding landscape has engaged with sex and gender, right? It was, I think, work undertaken by Londa Schiebinger a few years ago, and the engagement was pretty significant. So funders, that component has come on board. That aspect of that stakeholder group has come on board, and I do think it's made a difference.
But I also think that that has been a little bit fragmented. Like certain funders have been really great. I mean, the Canadian Institute of Health Research was one of the first funding agencies that in 2016 adopted and endorsed the SAGER guidelines.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
Whereas like others, again, are a little bit subject to political headwinds and again, there might be a lot of rhetorics in terms of, okay, yes, there is a commitment, but where is the funding really?
Right,
so I agree that there is still a great kind of progress, but still much more pressure maybe from the research community to the funders still remains.
Yeah, I think, one other piece of like advocacy and, work to persuade people of the need for this. I mean, I personally think it's self-evident, but it's really looking at what happens when you don't have this information, right? And I think that's very well understood on the clinical side.
Yeah.
And it's very well appreciated, which is why, our journals that publish more clinical or translational work have less of a hill to climb, because I think, people really do get it. But I think that kind of work is also really powerful. And I think the other thing that I've found very encouraging is that change is happening across regions. So for example, Japan is taking a very hard look at sex and gender and what they can do within the research ecosystem to encourage it. I was in a talk last year at a Japanese institute, and there was some really, really inspiring conversations there about how they were working to promote awareness and behavior change with graduate students and postdocs and early research, early career researchers. So I do think that I do think we should be optimistic, and I do think that 2020, the 20th anniversary will see an even greater leap.
It will be within the curriculum of every graduate course to follow SAGER guidelines in designing any research, if applicable. That would be awesome.
I'm confident. It's an amazing movement.
This is a very nice note to stop at this point. And I see in the chat there are some comments. I would want to very much ask participants to share their experience with SAGER. As an editor, if you are editing a journal, have you adopted SAGER guideline? And if yes, what are the challenges you're facing, or what kind of suggestions are you expecting from this panel? And if you're a researcher, have you ever considered using SAGER guideline, or are you going to use the guideline in designing your research? I see Mary is adding participants to the panel. That's great. We've got questions on a row, so I'll go just one by one. And for the ones who still are thinking, please feel free to put in the chat, because you're all coming from different parts of the globe, your view on how SAGE guideline is being adopted in your region, in your country. So that's
Hello, everybody. And as I said earlier, happy birthday to SAGER. I do remember Shirin coming up to me and saying, I'd like to start a gender policy group. And I was like, okay. I was president at the time. And Shirin put together a great group and they did all the work. And I sort of watched from the sidelines and encouraged them. And it's been fantastic. And then in the last 14 years I've been at the Lancet group, and we were trying to get Lancet to endorse officially. And this is relevant to some of the questions that I had earlier. There was reluctance not to follow the guidelines, but to endorse, because Lancet had endorsed Consort and Strobe and a couple of others. And then they felt that's it, because we're always being asked to endorse more guidelines, and our information for authors is already very long. So we will follow SAGER, but we won't specifically endorse it. And that was the situation for quite a long time. And then for some reason, and I can't tell you why, there was a change of heart. And very pleased to say that we endorsed the SAGER guidelines. And we've been implementing them. Editors do checks. As everyone said, authors are getting much better at reporting. The peer reviewers are checking now. And as Sowmya said, we've put it all in our decision, our different letters. So it's a lot of work to do once, but you only have to do it once. So then every time you invite someone to peer review, invite someone to revise their manuscript, there's a SAGER clause, and you can leave it in or take it out as relevant. We're now moving to another step where authors submitting manuscripts will actually need to tick a box in Editorial Manager to say whether or not they've followed SAGER, and if not, why not. I think the challenge for the next 10 years is, it's one thing to say I've followed the SAGER guidelines. It's one thing for even editors to check and say, yes, they've done this, but there are different levels of compliance. So the basic level is, please just tell us how many men, how many women, were there other options? Are you looking at sex or gender? Were people offered prefer not to say in terms of identity or other gender options? We're getting there very slowly, in that we get numbers of men and women, or males and females, in our clinical papers at the Lancet. And in psychiatry, we do get other gender options, because that tends to go with the discipline. We're quite a lot of our papers are on that social science end. What we don't get is many papers doing a sex or gender-based analysis. Some do, some don't have the data, and SAGER's quite clear, if you don't have enough people in your sample, you can't do it, but it should be listed as a limitation. But we have samples where they're big enough and people have not done that analysis. And particularly if it's a study with a protocol and it's not specified in the protocol, then people will say, oh, it wasn't in our protocol. So we will say, that's fine, please do it, and label it as a post hoc analysis. And I think that's where we'll be going in the next year or so, is to push on that. And the other thing, when we published the checklist, we introduced a few extra elements that some of the Lancet journals follow. In particular, for clinical trials, it was adverse event reporting. And that was actually driven by Lancet Hematology, because in some of the hematological disorders, men and women are responding differently to drugs or other interventions in terms of their adverse events. And we're probably seeing this a bit in psychiatry. So some of the Lancet journals, we ask, in a clinical trial, you have to report your adverse events. And we're now saying, please, can you break those down by sex or gender, whatever data you've collected? Doesn't have to be in the main paper. It can be in the appendix if preferred. But we want those data. So I think those are our two challenges, is to improve the number of papers actually doing the analysis by sex or gender, and for clinical trials, the adverse event reporting.
Thank you, John. Very insightful. I know that Shirin is typing answer to Hasib's question, which was on Q&A. Laila, I think your mic is working now. Would you like to talk?
Yes, thanks, Bahar. I'm really glad to be here with you, with Shirin, with John, and everyone. It was a pleasure to work with you. And what I would like to add is that the importance of the translations of the SAGER guidelines. From my experience here in Brazil, having translated the SAGER guidelines and also the checklists helped to expand its usage among journals and researchers. And I think it will, it was very useful for our community, for our non-English speaking community. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Laila. Excellent. Shirin, do you want, if you have prepared the answer to Hasib, maybe you want to read it out loud for everyone?
Sure. And before I do that, great to see you, Laila. And just to add that, again, we are just having access to the accesses and reach of SAGER guideline in English, but I'm just know that the translation has had a huge impact in the publication in other languages. And I, again, really, really encourage all of you who are interested to do additional translations, but also share with us how those have had an impact. And Hasib had a really good question. I'm reading it loud unless Hasib wants to do it herself. The SAGER guidelines were published in 2016. The SDG framework 2030, on the other hand, was mainstreamed in the publishing much later in 2020 through the SDGs Publishers Compact, which actually I didn't know about. Out of 17 SDGs, the SDG 5, gender equality, and of course, directly related to the SAGER guidelines. And I would also add actually SDG 3, which is on health. But looking back, do you think, as a pioneer of gender equity in research publishing ecosystem, the SAGER has supported the publishers to achieve at least the SDG 5? And again, I don't know to what extent the publishers have achieved that. And it's the first time I'm really I would love to hear more about the publisher impact. But apparently, SAGER guidelines might have contributed to accelerating that progress. And I really think that is a great angle, furthermore, in addition to other aspects of implementing the SAGER guidelines, to advocate for a greater uptake and implementation of those. So thank you so much for sharing that, Hasib, and feel free to share more about the Publisher Compact.
Absolutely, indeed. And I think Publisher Compact might be a good ally for SAGER, Shirin. So it's a good channel to follow up on that. Excellent. I see a long queue here on the panelists, so I'm going to go further to Liz. Liz, please unmute your mic and ask your questions or share your comments and thoughts.
Yes, hi everyone. Nice to be here today with you, and happy 10th anniversary to SAGER. I'm very happy to continue our conversation after what Leila said about the potential of translating material into national languages. We have promoted and translated promotional material in anticipation of the 10th anniversary of SAGER and promoted via our networks, which is in Croatia. We have, I would say, a very large pool of journals that are present at the Hrčak portal of Croatian scientific journals, and also the members of our Croatian Association for Scholarly Communication and EASE Croatia. So we have promoted the SAGER guidelines, but I wanted to add some more thought about the importance of also joining the UN SDG Publishers Compact initiative, which was actually kind of start of our journal that I am editing, Food Technology and Biotechnology, which is a small academic journal published by the University of Zagreb Faculty of Food Technology and Biotechnology. So we started to consider more the impact that we have as the editors, but also that researchers can have on aligning or reaching, I would say, sustainable development goals. And one of the first things that we have endorsed before signing UN SDG Publishers Compact was actually SAGER guidelines. But with one, as John said before, one thing is to endorse it, and the next level is to adopt it, or at least to ask the authors to actively participate in it. So we have introduced the SAGER checklist in 2025. And we already are, even though we are not receiving a lot of manuscripts, which are expressing results related to animal or study on animals or humans, but when we do, we are asking authors to provide the SAGER checklist. And even though some of them are reporting that they don't have any data, at least we are raising the awareness of the importance of considering these for future research. But also we are receiving a lot of submissions that are covering these data, that in which the authors are expressing at which, they're going through the checklist and expressing at which points or parts of the manuscript they are providing the information related to sex and gender in their research, which is really encouraging for us, as we see that, first of all, the authors are reading our instructions to authors, and second, they are trying to keep the pace and to implement these best practices in their research. And even though perhaps they were not aware of them, the SAGER guidelines before, but now they are able to say, okay, we are implementing this in the research. We are aligned with the SAGER guidelines, which is great. So I'm very optimistic. The next step would be to for now, we are not rejecting submissions that do not have the SAGER checklist, but the next step will be to have it as an obligatory if you are conducting research on human and animals. So it's like a kind of a progress, slow but steady progress in our journal. So I congratulate you all on the work and looking forward to the next steps.
Excellent.
Thanks,
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing, Eva, and thank you, Shirin, for answering the second question in the Q&A. Is there any hand up?
Bahar, if I may just add as well to the conversation, and Eva, again, thank you so much for those great kind of examples and the work that you're doing. And I think throughout these years, we have, and Sowmya has also referred to that, we have tried to really encourage uptake and use of SAGER guidelines, not so much as like a compulsory and a checklist that must be done, but rather an invitation to understand these complexities of sex and gender, again, both of them beyond the binary, just to kind of highlight that this is specifically mentioned in the SAGER guidelines, and really invite for a collective efforts for us to produce better research, more ethical research, a research that can have an impact and support, again, equity and, again, gender equality. So again, I think this is important for us to build that as well. That is not yet another checklist for its own sake, but an invitation to really participate in generating better evidence. And understanding that these things take time, And people might do a little bit here. Maybe next research, they can collect more information or do a better sex and gender-based analysis. That again, even those incremental efforts should be acknowledged, because sometimes I also feel that people feel a little bit overwhelmed or intimidated by a lot of the complexity of, oh, how am I going to collect this information, or how am I going to do the sex and gender-based analysis? And I try to say, just start wherever it feels confident or comfortable. Again, the tools, there are lots of tools available. There's a lot of kind of experts out there you can always collaborate with to seek their advice. So again, any little steps sometimes is better than nothing.
Very encouraging. Thank you. I see there are many people in the panel. Is there anyone who wants to talk? Please raise your hand so Mary can open your mic. And in the meantime, maybe Shirin, while we are waiting for the mics to be open, do you want to briefly touch on the question in the Q&A and your answer?
Yes, for sure. We had a colleague who asked, thank you for the insightful discussion. My microphone is unfortunately not working, so I'll ask my question here. Building on the previous point, wouldn't it be important to move beyond focusing only on sex and gender identity, and also systematically include other gender dimensions such as gender expression, roles and norms, and gender relation? In my experience, when we talk about sex and gender, it often ends up being mostly about sex, and if gender is included, it is usually limited to gender identity. How can we encourage a broader and more comprehensive operationalization of gender in research? And just to add that, again, we have really tried to encourage that sex and gender are not the binary. And most importantly, I think there's a lot of additional frameworks available that kind of highlights the role of gender beyond the gender identity, and also the broader lens of gender norms, roles, relations, the distribution of power and resources from a gender perspective, and how they influence. And it has to be really related to the research questions. And I think there is definitely room for greater awareness, more training, specifically in health and medical research, where a lot of people are perhaps more inclined to focus on sex as a variable, biological variable, rather than the kind of a larger range of gender related dimensions that can influence health. So that's a really good question.
Yeah. I recall seeing Mike's comment in the chat while we were having the panel conversation about his kind of aspiration to bring in the SAGER policy into the submission system they have. Mike, do you want to say something?
Hello.
Hey.
Yes. Yes, just a quick one. Actually, here in South Africa, no, it's been a long-standing problem with gender, racial inequality, all sorts of inequalities until, I wouldn't say fairly recent, but still. And in our journal, I run a small journal, no, a museum-based journal. We expressly state that no discrimination of any kind would be tolerated, and this is pretty much what we state. But now, after going through after this seminar and going through all the documents on the EASE website, I think we just need explicitly state that gender, as said, as where appropriate, should be indicated. And more so, we publish in both natural sciences and humanities, but obviously at the broad scale in the country, many journals, because the country publishes almost 400 journals, we need to make maybe a more uniform policy, because in many other journals, like medical journals, sociological journals, and like especially in humanities, yes, they should be more clearly stated that sex and gender should be identified properly, and obviously when it comes to demographic analysis, demography should be clearly explained and stated. Yes, it's just a general comment. Thank you.
Excellent. This is great to hear, Mike. This
Thank
is
you.
awesome. Thank
Thank you.
you.
Great, Mike. And I do have to agree. And again, at the time when we developed the SAGER guidelines, we recognized that this was really the low-hanging fruit and everybody should do that. But increasingly, of course, the intersectional lens is absolutely critical. And sex and gender also remains a cross-cutting kind of a dimensions where adding additional intersectional factors will be just highlighting the additional disparities that we see from intersectional gender analysis. And we have also GRIT, which again, some other colleagues and we have collaborated in developing a more intersectional kind of a lens into, Joan, help me, science and technology.
Mary, do you see any hands up?
No, not at the moment.
People who have been participating in the chat, please just ping me if you have anything to add in the chat. So I'll go up and find it out. In the meantime, oh, I see new. Okay, so there is a comment from Clara from Argentina. She says, hi, in Argentina, a group of philosophers and researchers like Daniela Suarez Tomé offer an online course on feminist science that provides a very insightful theoretical framework on the topic. For example, they promote the concept of sex contextualism developed by Sarah Richardson, which aims to more precisely distinguish which attributes traditionally associated with biological sex are relevant to use in each specific research context. That's great. If there is any links, if there is any indications, please share. We would love to not only go and familiarize ourselves, but also use the opportunity of SAGER's 10th anniversary to promote this further among our networks. So Clara, please share anything that you have so we can echo it further.
Yeah. And I love that, Clara. I just have to say that SAGER was where we started as a kind of a baseline, but the goal is really trying to change the entire research ecosystem to do more feminist research. But that's a much bigger endeavor, and I would like to discuss that another point. Because it's more than just collecting and analyzing and reporting data. It is a bigger question at hand.
Lovely. Shirin, we have 5 minutes. Maybe this is a perfect time to talk about the anniversary itself. What's happening? What is going on at the birthday party?
Fantastic. Well, it is going to be a year-long campaign that GENDRO and EASE jointly are launching as of today, more or less. We started kind of slowly last week. And with that, we have shared with you all a press release and a media kit. So we encourage all of you to really participate and highlight your examples from your fields, how you have used the SAGER guidelines, translated them, where they have made an impact, where you have contributed through our social media channels with us. In addition, we have set new targets for this year in particular. The SAGER guidelines, the English version, the original version published in the Journal of the Research Integrity has had 1.4 million unique accesses and downloads, and we are hoping that we can reach 2 million by the end of this year. And we also hope that the top 100 journals and the top 15 publishers will all have adopted and incorporated the SAGER guidelines by the end of this year, as well as 20 influential public health institutions. In terms of publisher, I think 7 of the 15 have already done that. So we have come half the way. So we do encourage all of you to really participate in this campaign jointly, wherever you have a foot in or connections with any publishers or journals or institutions. Support the translation, dissemination, and adoption of the SAGER guidelines so we can really kind of take a step forward towards our 20th anniversary target. Thank you so much.
Excellent. There is one last question in the Q&A by Paula. Shirin, this is for you. Do you want to read it out loud and answer within the last 3 minutes?
Do you want to read it and then I can
Yeah,
answer?
I can.
So I
Thanks a
don't-
lot, Paula says. Thanks a lot for sharing all these interesting thoughts and insights. The question is, if you think this might still fit today's topic, at the Gender in Medicine group at Charité, and within the International Heart, it's an acronym for Heterogeneity Assessment Research Teams, formerly DMEs, collaboration. We strongly adhere to the SAGER guidelines. Recently, we have been discussing how this work is closely linked to intersectionality, which is another key priority for us to promote and systematically integrate into routine research and publishing practices. One open discussion point for us is currently whether we should advocate for the intersectional approaches to explicitly and consistently include sex and gender alongside other relevant social positions as core analytical dimensions. We would very much interested in your thoughts on this.
And my very short answer is yes. So we just
Excellent.
should.
Excellent. And we have
just should.
Sowmya who represent publishers. So Sowmya, would you want to have such kind of high quality submissions that have such detailed
A
description?
dream. Dream.
So Paula, go for
Yes.
it. Excellent, excellent. This was a pleasure for me, and I hope everyone enjoyed this birthday party. If there is any further questions in the chat that I missed, please give us some time. We will go through them and I will connect them to our panelists, Sowmya and Shirin, and we can come back to you. There is a lot of information in the chat, lots of links. There is a lot going on in these weeks about SAGER anniversary. So feel free to join the birthday party. Feel free to be the voice of SAGER guidelines, and we highly appreciate translation and dissemination across different languages and different parts of the globe. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Bahar, for a fantastic facilitation. And thank you, Sowmya and Gary. Great to see you all.
Thanks, everyone. Great
Thank
conversation.
you. Thank you very much. Have a good rest of the day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.